We're discussing the White House is joining the Biden campaign in pushing back against recent video clips going viral that make President Biden look as though he's confused during public events and other appearances. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre blasted the use of the misleading videos, which are edited to make the president look bad and then circulated by right-wing media and allies. Take a look.
They are cheap fakes video. They are done in bad faith, and some of your news organization have been very clear, have stressed that these the right-wing critics of the president have a credibility problem because of the fact checkers have repeatedly caught them pushing misinformation, disinformation. I think that it tells you everything that we need to know about how desperate Republicans are here. Instead of talking about the president's performance in office, and what I mean by that is his legislative wins, what he's been able to do for the American people across the country, we're seeing these deep fakes, these manipulated videos. And it is, again, done in bad faith.
Wow. That's all they've got.
The Republican accounts circulating many of the clips responded, claiming the videos are unedited and promised to keep posting them.
A lie.
And also, just if something is unedited, it's really one angle,
lies.
Not showing the whole story.
How about this, Mia? They lie about their lies, which, of course, you would expect liars to lie about their lies.
Oh, I mean, we're talking about Trump.
But they're lying about their cheap fake. They're not bad.
Post.
By the way, I got to say this one more time. They're only helping Joe Biden. They're only lowering expectations. They do it before every State of the Union address, and then afterwards, they're so freaked out that Biden did well, they say he must have been on cocaine. A sort of, 2024 version of, maybe an Eric Clapton song in the background, but they're doing the same thing for the debate. They lower expectations.
Yeah.
They say he's not cogent. And then he goes out and he does a really good job. And they're like, wait, what happened?
The Washington Post has reported about how these cheap fakes were used to attack Biden during his recent trip to Normandy. And we showed you last week the Trump campaign sharing a clip which appeared to show President Biden at the G7 summit wandering off from other world leaders before the Italian prime minister comes over to alert him about a group photo. But when you see the video from a different angle, you see the whole story. After a skydiver landed in front of the president and other leaders, President Biden turns to his left where there are troops. The president appears to say something to them and gives them the thumbs up before he's tapped on the arm by the Italian prime minister. As these cheap fakes continue to circulate, there is growing concern that attempts to fact check them may not be able to keep up. As one Democratic strategist puts it, quote, the lie is sprinting the 100-meter dash and the fact check is taking a stroll on the beach. So it's never going to catch up and it's never going to have the same reach. And this is the problem. And this is why, the debate, everything about this campaign will make somebody who is in support of democracy and perhaps would even choose Joe Biden over Donald Trump just in support of democracy, never going to have a chance against lies, disinformation, and crazy insults.
Never going to have a chance. Michael Steele, I disagree. They will have a chance. In fact, if you look at Donald Trump's track record and Donald Trump's Republican Party over the last 7 years, they're 0-7. Maybe the Biden team's going to have to work harder. Maybe Democrats are going to have to work harder. Maybe people who actually like American democracy are going to work harder. But they just have to work harder and get the word out that these people are lying. Not only is the RNC lying, but also mainstream media outlets are now all in on the lies.
Yeah, I think that's true. I agree with you, Joe, a little bit on that. The reality is a very stark one, and it's one that a number of us have been warning about for a while. You know what we haven't brought up in this conversation, which is right there at the tip of the spear, is AI. The AI generated ads, where you can take these events. We're talking about taking a clip and just showing one angle from it. We've already seen the RNC and the Biden, the Trump campaign effort play in this space. When the RNC put out its AI ad last fall, didn't tell anybody, they had completely made it up in out of whole cloth. And then, of course, the robocalls, using the voice of the president to tell voters not to vote during the New Hampshire primary. So you've already seen these practices put in place. The problem is, it's not just one of, oh, guess what? Fact checkers can't catch up or keep up. The problem is you have mainstream media outlets that are, like as you mentioned before, the Wall Street Journal, in their own ways perpetuating this. So
right.
It gives an air of legitimacy to some of this. And before you have a chance to come back and say, wait a minute, Wall Street Journal, what the hell are you doing? You know that's not what this
right.
is. Why don't you come clean about it? It's already been placed up on X, right? A platform that Elon Musk said, hey, lie as much as you want. We don't care. And it
right.
goes out there. And then what do? So you're right. I think in the main, people kind of know some of this, but it's going to get worse, not better, between now and November. And that's going to be the difficult part, particularly for American media that wants to try to play the balls and strikes, but wind up actually, tipping their hand a little bit from time to time.
I mean, look, in major areas where people get their news, this lie or this concept about Joe Biden is being validated. And you brought up the Howie Kurtz segment that I showed you, and he played Sean Hannity doing an entire segment on that scene with the paratroopers. That's a show that has a great deal of influence. A lot of people watch it, they get their information, and they make decisions based on it. They come to conclusions based on it. They do 10 minutes on that. I mean, I know you might think it's funny. I don't think it's funny. I think that you don't think it matters? I think it matters.
That's what they do.
They have a lot of power
that's what they do.
And a lot of influence, and they don't use responsible judgment or facts or news. Their goals there are different. The goals there are not to share news with people.
Should we get a breaking news headline down below?
No, I hear you, but
I mean, they've been doing
I think this is now
doing.
reaching a fever,
All right, but here's the
pitch.
thing. And I guess this is what gets me about Democrats and people who are center left. Like, they're shocked that gambling is going on in the institution instead of figuring out how to shut it down. Hey, I'm not shocked. This is what they do. This is what they've always done. I mean, I
don't remember the Wall Street Journal.
Am I shocked? I was going to say, am I shocked at the story and a couple of stories that have gotten into the Wall Street Journal, like the day after Andrew Ross Sorkin reports that Donald Trump was just out of his mind and people were laughing at him, and a group of CEOs the next morning, you've got the Wall Street Journal going, CEOs love Donald Trump coming out at the meeting. No, it's just not true. So I'm so shocked I'm shocked by so few things in the political realm anymore, or the media realm, that I hate to say it, but I will say, yes, I am shocked that that's happening to the Wall Street Journal. Because what I've always done when I have friends that read the Epoch Times, or I have friends that read other websites that are run by, Chinese religious cults or other, are funded by Qatar. What I always do is go, well, listen, you want the news, go to the Wall Street Journal. It's a Murdoch paper, and they've got some of the best reporters anywhere in America and the world. And that's sort of, Sam Stein, that's sort of changing here in this landscape. I've got to also say, when it comes to the New York Post, it's very rich that right-wing Trumpers have been beating their chest in self-righteous indignation for about 3.5 years now, going, how could you have ever doubted the New York Post and the Hunter Biden laptop story? How could that have even gone through your mind? Gone through your mind that maybe something being planted in the New York Post may have been misinformation, when they're showing us exactly why reasonable people would believe anything dumped at the end of a campaign that favors Donald Trump is just out misinformation. Look at the parachuting story and everything else the New York Post is doing right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you're going to run deceptive videos, the risk you run as an institution is that people won't believe you when you get legitimate stuff, right? That's the flip side. I will say there's something that Jonathan said earlier in this program that I think it's worth stressing for the viewers, and I think it was underscored by the quote you read from Eric Schultz, which is this is a two-tiered system. One is that these videos get put out at a remarkable speed, and the second is that people who are interested in sort of the factual underpinnings of the videos, or lack thereof, I should say, frantically try to keep up. And Jonathan knows this very well, but our internal Slack channels at Politico regularly do feature these videos being put in there with the question, where is the full clip? Like, what is the context of this clip? Yeah. And journalists across the country are being forced into this posture. Imagine how much time and resources you waste trying to track down the validity of the actual video. Just to make sure whether it's in context or not. Sometimes it is, but often it isn't. Yeah. And that's just the current state of journalism, right? It's like you have to spend a lot of time sussing out whether these videos are real or not. And I fear that this is going to be just the future because, like Michael Steele said, the technology is just going to get more and more efficient at making these videos look more and more real when they're really not.
Well, that's not you're absolutely right, Sam. I agree with everything you said, except that it's not wasted time for news organizations to check this stuff out, because that's what we have to do. We have to interrogate every purported fact and see if it's real or not. What has really struck me about the parachute video, I'm not any sort of believer in conspiracies, but I do believe in coordination. And boy, this parachute thing was so coordinated. I wondered what that was about. And Karine Jean-Pierre said it smacked of desperation. I've got to admit that occurred to me because there was a certain desperate feel to it. I mean, you just look at the clip from a different angle and it just obliterates the story they're trying to tell. It's just so easily disproved.
And Gene, that's the thing.
Why?
It's so, Gene, that's the thing, right? They put this up knowing they're going to be called out as liars, knowing that there are other angles that are going to prove that they are lying to their audience, that it will be exposed, that they lied today, but the sun's going to rise tomorrow, and the facts are going to become clear, and people are going to wake up and go, oh my God, they were lying to us, and yet they didn't care. Maybe they thought our readers are stupid. Maybe they thought our readers live in a fact-free echo chamber. I don't know what they thought, but whatever it was, they were undervaluing and underestimating their readers.
More than 100,000 Maryland residents will now have cannabis-related convictions pardoned after Governor Wes Moore signed an executive order yesterday. The order wipes the slate for 175,000 marijuana convictions and makes Maryland the first state in America to issue mass pardons on cannabis paraphernalia-related charges. Maryland legalized recreational marijuana back in 2023 after the state legislature passed a constitutional amendment on that. And Maryland Governor Wes Moore joins us now. He's also a member of the Biden-Harris campaign's National Advisory Board. So thank you so much for joining us. This is historic. Tell us first of all, about the mass pardons. Who is this going to impact and why you did it?
Well, we did it because this is about both moral justice and economic justice. And the reason I bring up both of those two things is, Maryland voted that we should have a recreational cannabis market. In fact, we voted by a 70% margin that we were going to have a recreational cannabis market. So my administration has been working over the past 18 months and rolling out what many believe to be the most equitable and the smoothest rollout that we've seen of a cannabis rollout inside of our state. We have 174 new social equity licenses, people who now have the ability to sell legally cannabis, but also we know, which is again, a historic number. But at the same time, we know this. You cannot talk about the benefits of legalization if you're not willing to wrestle with the consequences of criminalization. that we still had we still had tens of thousands, over 100,000 people who still had cannabis charges. And so when we say from a moral perspective, you cannot continue to have people who have records for something that is now legal and a multi-billion-dollar industry, having an ability to get jobs, having an ability to go to school, an ability to get a home. Right. And at the same time, it's an economic imperative, where I was with someone named Shiloh yesterday, for example, who for years has had a misdemeanor cannabis charge that has not allowed him to keep steady work. He got one job, and he was fired on the second day because he didn't pass a background check because of a misdemeanor cannabis charge, something that is now legal. And so this was really important, not just economically for the state. It was really important for the individuals who received the gubernatorial pardon. But also, this was really important when it came to taking a moral course for how Maryland was going to operate and how Maryland was going to lead.
Hey, Governor, Sam Stein here. I was going to ask you about Maggie Rogers and Maggie Rogers Day in Maryland. I saw the video of it, but we're going to stick on topic for the point today. Obviously, what you're doing
she's a good Maryland girl.
Yes, she is, Eastern Shore. Look, what you're doing in Maryland, obviously, on marijuana is, to a degree, something that the Biden administration has tried to do nationally, which is just essentially lower the temperature around it, get rid of the harsh penalties for use of cannabis. But I'm wondering, as you take these proactive steps to normalize, essentially, cannabis use, is there more that the feds can and should be doing on that front as well? Not just decriminalization, but looking more towards the legalization elements.
Yes, and I applaud the Biden-Harris administration because they've been able to do things that have been really important to this cause, like moving cannabis from a Schedule I to a Schedule III drug. There's no reason that something like cannabis should have had the same classification as heroin. There's another synthetic drugs. And so that was actually an important step about the way that society looks at it, and also urging governors to be able to take this look. And the thing that I would continue to tell people is, if you're wondering whether or not you should do this, if you're wondering whether or not this should happen in your states, I would say this: listen to your people. Listen to what they're telling you. Keep your ear close to the ground, because that's exactly what we did in the state of Maryland. When we put it up for a referendum, we saw overwhelmingly that the people of our state wanted this done. When we were pulling together this package to have now what is the largest mass pardon in U.S. history for cannabis, for misdemeanor cannabis charges, we actually brought everybody around the table. We had law enforcement, and we had activists, that we had community members, and we had people who were involved in business and in the industry. Everybody had a seat at the table. So for anyone wondering how you go about doing this or whether or not this is a good thing, I think you should do what we did in Maryland. Listen to your people, and they'll tell you what the right direction to go in is.
Governor, Michael Steele here. It's good to see you again, sir. I hope everything's going well for you.
Good to see you, LG.
Yes, indeed. So this effort is unique, and as you said, on so many fronts. I have a two-parter for you real quick. The first is, what other safeguards, in addition to opening up the cannabis market in Maryland, 174 new licenses, for example, what other safeguards or steps has the state taken to introduce this market in a safe way? Because there are still families and communities that are concerned about this expansion of cannabis. This effort to clear those records is applauded and supported, but there's also the other side of it. So there's that. And the other piece is the celebration that all Marylanders had when you declared the harbor open and the Key Bridge project underway. Talk a little bit about where things are with that effort as well. So you've got these twin episodes in your administration which really stand out and stand up, I guess, in many ways, your leadership. So talk about how you're addressing these two divergent moments for your administration.
Thank you so much, LG. And yeah, when it came down to really roll out the new cannabis market, we knew that it needed to be transparent, it needed to be safe, it needed to be fair. And those were the guidelines that we looked at. And so in addition to making sure that we had real safety guidelines, and this was part of the whole point of actually regulating it, and when you're turning into a recreational market, is part of the challenge you had with the illegal market was you had people who had no idea what they're actually getting. You had people who had no idea what was actually inside the materials. By being able to do this in a proper way, by being able to do it in a controlled way, you're actually able to take part of the revenue and actually move it towards safety criteria, move it towards support systems for families. You're able to actually do creative things with ways that can help it to be not just a more accepted, but a safer way of integration into society. And then also we had a clear focus on providing access to capital to people as they were trying to enter into the industry. Part of the challenge we've always had, not just with cannabis, but with a collection of different industries, has been the initial tranche capital, right? The friends and family round. And the thing is, we know that not everybody has the same friends and not everybody has the same family. And so by being able to add access to capital to that frame was a way of helping to make sure that we can have an equitable distribution in the way that we looked at the cannabis rollout. And I appreciate the words about the opening of the Port of Baltimore. You're right. I mean, I remember that first morning when at 2:02, my phone rang. And we saw that there was a ship that was the size of the Eiffel Tower that was now caught in the Patapsco River with tens of thousands of tons of steel and water. And I asked people, say, how long is this going to take? And people were telling us this could take up to a year. And I said, it can't. I got tens of thousands of port workers. I cannot tell them this is going to take a year to get them back on the job. And so people worked around the clock. And I'm so thankful for the measure of coordination, for how the private sector stepped up, the federal government stepped up, the state coordinated with all these various units, and what they told us was going to take 11 months, we got done in 11 weeks. And the Port of Baltimore is back and moving right now, and it's a beautiful sight.
All right, Maryland Governor Wes Moore, thank you. Good luck against the Yankees tonight.
Go O's.
Thanks for being on the show this
morning.
Go
O's. Go O's.
All right. Donald Trump and his allies continue to go after one of the most extreme Republicans in Congress for not being sufficiently loyal to the former president. Yesterday, Trump phoned into a tele-rally for the primary opponent of Virginia's Bob Good, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, after endorsing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in this year's Republican presidential race. The congressman tried to get back in Trump's good graces last month by showing up outside the New York City courthouse to support him during his trial there.
Did that work for him? No?
Despite that, Trump endorsed Good's opponent just a few days later, writing on social media that the congressman's efforts were, quote, too late. Outside, groups with ties with former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy have also spent millions of dollars in support of Good's opponent after the congressman voted to remove McCarthy from the speakership last year. The Virginia primary is today.
Jonathan Lemire.
Why would anybody trust him
I would
at all?
Say the odds not good for Congressman Good. Especially if you look at, like, for instance, 22. I mean, let's look in Pennsylvania. Dave McCormick would have most likely won that Pennsylvania Senate seat. And Trump turned on him, supported Dr. Oz. Maybe it was because of TV or something else. And he's done it time and again. And in so doing, has cost Republicans control of the United States Senate for the last 2 terms. That said, his endorsement still matters more than anything else to the Republican base.
Yeah, no, you just hit it. Trump's endorsement record for general elections is very spotty, and sometimes that's a direct result of who he picks in the primary. But within the GOP primary process, he's still kingmaker. It is very rare that he backs someone and that person then loses in a primary. And even in this case, this is the chair of the House Freedom Caucus. This is an important figure in the right, someone who is aligned with Trump in just about every way ideologically, but he made the unforgivable sin of backing Ron DeSantis and even made a pilgrimage to the courthouse here in New York a few weeks ago, and that didn't help him either. We should note his opponent did as well. So, yeah, I mean, barring a real surprise, barring some real institutional advantages or a ground game that we're not aware of, Congressman Good would appear to be in real trouble tonight.
So top Democratic strategist James Carville is out with a new prediction about whether or not he thinks Donald Trump will show up to the presidential debate next week.
Well, if I was a gambler, actually I am a gambler. Yeah. I'd take even money if Trump doesn't show up. Okay, I just think...
You don't think Trump's coming next week?
I mean, I don't know, but if I was, I think he's going to wake up and say and decide Just like he said he was going to testify in his defense of his trial. He put on a defense. Let him show up. I wouldn't be shocked, but I certainly would not be surprised. If you gave me even money, I'd say he's a no-show. He'll just get up and say, I'm just not going to do it.
No, I don't think the guy can. Mike Barnicle, I love listening to James. That's James being James. But I don't think Donald Trump can avoid a microphone, lights, and an audience of tens of millions of people watching him.
No, he'll be there, but the odds are I would bet that he goes haywire during the debate when his microphone is shut off. I bet he'll act up over that, no doubt. But, yeah. He's got to show up. He's got to show up. He'll be there.
Yeah. What do you think, Jonathan Lemire? Any reporting that would line up with what James Carville said, or are they planning ahead? Because we've talked about Joe Biden's preparing. Donald Trump doesn't really prepare for anything. You can read the first 3 pages of Art of the Deal, and you see that it's sort of his way of doing business and politics is just showing up and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's no reporting to back that up. In fact, Trump aides in recent days have said that Trump has started to prepare for the debate. They're not claiming he's doing full-fledged rehearsals, but they say he's starting to go through some possible lines of attack and defense. But there is an expectation he'll be there. But what Carville said, some Democrats have been saying all along, this idea that they feel like Trump will be the one to back out of this, that he has perhaps too much to lose, in part because he's ahead in the polls, narrowly, to be clear, narrowly, but has been consistently ahead in some of these battleground states. But I don't think that's the case. I think for both of these men will be there, and the night looms really large for both. And there's been so much discussion about whether President Biden can have a good performance that night, whether he'll be able to deliver, whether he'll be able to sort of quiet the doubts about his age and fitness for the job. And as we have covered time and again, he certainly did during the State of the Union this year. He has in other big moments. The Biden campaign feels like this is actually a real opportunity to change the trajectory of the race and to remind voters, hey, Donald Trump, you haven't really listened to him in 4 years. Here he is. Trump also hasn't debated in a long time. There's a chance that his performance may not be strong at all.
Michael Steele, this is going to be a nerve-wracking debate for both sides. Wondering if their fighters, their aged fighters, are going to be able to get through the 15 rounds. So I think there are going to be a lot of staff members on both sides, a lot of Americans sort of holding their breath, whistling past the graveyard, however you want to call it. Yeah. What do you think is? Give us a tell of the tape here. What are you looking for in this debate? What do you think we're going to see? What do we need to look for as viewers?
So let me just put on the record that I have been where James Carville is since they announced this debate.
Really?
The political incentives are not there for Donald Trump to do this, let alone to your point about wanting to get in front of tens of millions of people. Well, he had that chance during the Republican primary where he could have owned the stage and wiped the floor with these guys, but he didn't take it. It's not a strength for him. He knows it. And the hype, particularly, and this is the thing to look for. And for me, and a very important aspect of this debate is not what these candidates say, but how these candidates react to this environment with no audience. It is a beautiful thing, Joe, to not have the inane whooping and hollering and catcalling by, this, cavalcade of people sitting there for one side or the other. Donald Trump feeds off of that. That's his energy. That's his safe space when he says something inanely stupid. He knows he's got a group of people that are going to be sitting there applauding. Oh, my God, Donald, that was just so wonderful. That was so wonderful. And then, of course, helping to take down his opponent. That goes away. Shutting off the mics, he'll still talk, but the energy is different. So I'm looking for how Trump reacts in this space where he has been checked by not having an audience to back up his lies and his silliness, and to be able to deal with Joe Biden, who, yes, has his own faults and weaknesses, but not like Donald Trump. And so that's going to be an interesting space to see how that plays out with the silence of the audience.
That is such a fascinating point, Mika. And it also underlines the point that Donald Trump's always been able to control his environment. He's always had screaming fans. He's always had these people. It doesn't matter what he says, how stupid it is. He can talk about boats and sharks, electric batteries, all these other things, electric boats. And he'll have people laughing, cheering, doing all of that. You know, you look at The Apprentice, we talked about that. They'd tape him for hour after hour after hour, edit it down, get the best 3 minutes here, the best 2 minutes there. Nothing wrong with that. That's how TV works, unless you do 4-hour shows like we do. But this is going to be him out of his safe space. And we got a glimpse of what that looked like without cameras last week when Andrew Ross Sorkin reported that when he went before the CEOs, which should have been a friendly group, they were really surprised by how many steps he had lost, surprised by some of the crazy things he said, surprised that at times he was rambling on and really went off topic. So there is a lot to lose for Donald Trump in this debate. Just like there's a lot to lose for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
So high stakes for both.
High stakes, just counter to the quietness of the studio that a lot of people think Donald Trump will be jarred by. You know, The Apprentice tapings, he's been in quiet studios at a table with people waiting for the shot to come. He knows a lot more about what it feels like to be talking with someone in a media environment, to be creating content, to be doing a show than most people. Oh, yeah. Most people in Congress.
No, yeah.
So I just wouldn't underestimate. I think he might be quite comfortable.
Might be
We'll
really
see.
comfortable in that setting.
Yeah.
Coronavirus cases are rising in 22 states, including Oklahoma, where you plan to hold a big rally this week. Aren't you worried about people getting sick?
No, because if you look, the numbers are very minuscule compared to what it was. It's dying out. No, we're not concerned. Actually, Oklahoma has had a very low rate, relatively speaking.
Ay caramba. Yeah, that's the same guy that said it was 1 or 2 people coming in from China. They've been taken care of. That it was going to go away in the spring. It'll be done by Easter. Just never stopped spreading disinformation, and people died because of that. Was then President Donald Trump 4 years ago. Yesterday, once again brushing off concerns about holding an indoor rally in Oklahoma in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just a few days after that event, the state would set a new single-day record for coronavirus cases, which health officials said likely was caused by Donald Trump's rally. Trump held that event despite warning from its top members of the coronavirus task force, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, and the former director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases joins us now. He also served as President Joe Biden's chief medical advisor before retiring last year. Today, he's out with a new memoir titled On Call, A Doctor's Journey in Public Service. Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for being with us. There's so many questions we could ask you. I just want to start with an overview. What's the main message of this book? What do you want readers and Americans to take away from what you've written?
Well, I believe there are 2 main messages, Joe. The first is that is somewhat of an unusual perspective that I had for being at the NIH for 54 years and being director of the NIAID, the Infectious Disease Institute, for almost 40 years. And I had the privilege of dealing with 7 presidents through some of the most impactful outbreaks of infectious diseases in history. It's bookended by the early years with HIV and then the last years of my career there with COVID. And it's been an extraordinary journey, and as I say in the title, in public service. So I thought it would be a good way to get a personal historical perspective, but also I hope that it encourages young people who have any interest in medicine, science, public health, or even public service of how gratifying that a career in public service can be. So 2 reasons.
So we could ask again a lot about your time with Donald Trump, it certainly was extraordinarily momentous because of the pandemic. I am curious, though, looking back through the years, across the decades, your public service, what are you most proud of? What do you write about in here? And as you were going back through the years, did you think, wow, we really got that right?
Well, there are several things. You know, with the very early part of my career, when I developed some remission-inducing therapies for diseases, this is way before HIV, that were really very, very highly fatal diseases, inflammatory autoimmune diseases. And then in 1981, things changed, and I started on HIV, which was, you know, a 40-year journey of first what was almost hopelessness of almost exclusively young gay men in the early years of the 80s, to the development of drugs and the essentially turning around the life of these individuals in collaboration with the pharmaceutical companies. I'm most proud of the role I played as the director of the Institute in getting these drugs to save so many lives throughout the world. But probably one of the most important things that I'm proud of is working with President George W. Bush to put together the PEPFAR program, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which now, 20 years into it, has been responsible for saving 25 million lives, mostly in the developing world and mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, my institute, the vaccine center that I established when I was director, played a major role in the development of the COVID vaccines, again, in collaboration with the pharmaceutical companies. So it's been a very long journey, and there are several landmarks in there that I feel very good about.
So, Dr. Fauci, 40 years of helping and/or healing, sometimes both at once. In all those 40 years, could you ever imagine the impact that the latter years, dealing with COVID, dealing with the virus, helping cure people with a vaccine, that you and your family would come under such a sustained political assault?
No, that never in my wildest dreams would have occurred to me. I mean, there had been disagreements all along. I mean, having advised 7 presidents, it's very, very likely that you're going to get differences of opinion, diversity of political ideology, and people would sometimes try and, you know, get one point or so over the other. We saw that all the time. But it wasn't the profound degree of divisiveness now, where instead of having diversity of opinions, we have profound division, vitriol, and ad hominem, which is completely different. Even back when Republicans were, you know, mixing it up with the Democrats and arguing about things, there was always collegiality, there was civility, and there was respect for institutions. Now, in the last few years, it's sort of disappeared.
To follow that question, we now head into a moment where, because of that divisiveness, it's become a political issue. Like vaccinations in particular have become a political issue, where you have not just Donald Trump, but other Republicans saying, no, don't take the COVID vaccine. We have other prominent figures saying, no, you should not take other vaccines as well for other things that have been standard, that everyone has received for decades. So with this much of disinformation and anger and just flat out vaccine hesitancy, how nervous are you about our ability to handle the next pandemic, whatever it might be?
I'm very concerned about that, because the misinformation and disinformation about absolutely scientifically proven life-saving interventions, it's astonishing to me that so many people, by political ideology, will make a decision that would actually endanger their lives. I mean, the facts are, and as a physician and a scientist, this is very painful to me, that if you look at red states versus blue states, because of people getting less vaccinated because you're a Republican versus a Democrat, there are more deaths and hospitalizations in red states versus blue states. That's horrible that that happens, that people suffer and die because of misinformation that's related to a political ideology.
Dr. Fauci, you know, we're in an environment right now, unfortunately, in which Americans' faith and trust in institutions is arguably at an all-time low. It's not only public health. It's not only science, it's government, journalism. So there's a lot of soul searching going on right now in those institutions. I wonder, though, if you think that public health has some soul searching to do in terms of how it lost the trust of the American public, especially thinking about the early days of the pandemic, where not only Donald Trump, but even public health officials at all levels of government were not telling Americans what they knew about the virus and what they didn't know, but arguably telling them what they thought they needed to know and got it wrong in terms of the need to wear masks, in terms of the virus being airborne, led to 30,000 deaths in 6 weeks here in New York City. Is there any soul searching to be done there?
There's always soul searching to be done, and anything, particularly as extraordinary as a pandemic that killed 1.2 million people. Nobody's perfect, and nobody did everything right. We did a lot of things right, but not everything right. I would take a little issue with what you're saying about telling people what we think they want to hear. I think what we need to do better is to get people to understand that we were dealing with a moving target, and science as a discipline is self-correcting. So that if you look at what's going on in January and February of 2020, what we knew then, what we knew about the virus, and the fact that the virus was changing, we need to make it more clear to people that we will report what we know based on, in real time, what the evidence is. If the evidence changes, the public can sometimes get the opinion, well, these scientists are flip-flopping. They're changing their mind. We need to understand better and explain better that science is a discipline that allows you to collect information. And when that information changes, science demands that you change your opinion based on the new information. We didn't do a very good job of that.
Joe.
Yeah, we're talking about the first pandemic since 1918, 1919. And, you know, we often talk, Doctor, about the fog of war. Well, this pandemic was a war of its own kind with you know, over 1 million people dying. And I'm just curious how frustrating it is to you that people will go back and pick up something that you may have said in March of 2020, or something that another health official or a politician may have said later in that year, whether it's about masks or vaccines or anything. We didn't know. None of us knew where this was going. None of us knew, like, for instance, how long would the vaccine work? Would we need one booster every 5 years? Would we need one every 5 months? How frustrating is it to you that people look back with 2020 hindsight and judge you when you and the rest of the world was in the fog of war?
You know, it is quite frustrating, Joe, and that relates exactly to the answer to the question just a moment ago, where I was saying that people really don't appreciate. I don't blame them for that, but they don't appreciate that we were dealing with a moving target. And when we were saying things in the beginning, wear a mask or not, how the virus is spread. I mean, originally it was felt, understandably but incorrectly, by the CDC, that it is spread by the same way that flu is spread, namely mostly by droplets, when in fact most of the transmission is not only by not droplets, it's by aerosol, but also 50 to 60% of the people who transmit it have no symptoms at all. We didn't know that in the beginning. It was a changing, moving target. You're absolutely right. Was it frustrating? It was terribly frustrating because people like to take things out of context and do a gotcha. That's part of the reporting process. And I accept that. It's the world we live in, but it certainly is frustrating.
Yes, well, we greatly appreciate you being here. We appreciate your service through the years so much. The new book is called On Call, A Doctor's Journey in Public Service. Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thank you.
So Mike, I wanted to go back to Pete Wehner's excellent column in The Atlantic, you know, because there's been hand-wringing through the, how do we understand the Trump voters? We've all done it. What do we need to understand? What is this about? This is the forgotten working class man and woman. This is blah, blah, blah. At this point, this is about people, as Pete says, who are knowingly supporting a guy who has spewed authoritarian talking points, a guy who lies repeatedly, a guy who twists the facts, bends the facts, lied about the last election. And Pete, I wrote it down. He talked about how they don't like strong, if they're presented with strong arguments, compelling arguments, compelling facts, they'll push away. I would say it's even more than that. They are allergic to basic facts. Donald Trump lies all the time. They are allergic to let's take the big lie, for instance. They know, Mike Johnson knows it's a big lie. Lindsey Graham knows it's a big lie. They have 63 federal judges and courts that said this is a big lie. They had a Supreme Court that said, United States Supreme Court that said this is a big lie. They know. With even Republican officials saying, from Georgia to Michigan, this is a big lie. They know it's a big lie. So what do? They go to websites that are funded by Qatar, or TV networks funded by Qatar, are funded and run as sort of a front for a Chinese religious cult. They know what they're doing. Yeah. Mike, at this point, the gig is up. They know exactly what they're doing. They're spreading lies in support of a guy who wants to be an authoritarian leader.
Pete came up with a marvelous phrase in that piece, motivated ignorance. And the motivated ignorance of Donald Trump has been a lifetime habit. A lifetime habit. He's been operating on motivated ignorance since he's been 17, 18 years of age. He did it all through his business career, all through his life, nearly every day. And in politics, he's done it consistently. And he has developed, indeed, a cult around him. Now, part of that cult, I would think, given human nature, you'd have to feel badly for, because they are people who bought into what Trump says in his motivated ignorance, thinking it was going to help improve their lives. Well, it hasn't. It hasn't. And that's the way you defeat Donald Trump. Point out the facts of people's existence. The big tax breaks that he always talks about. Did it help someone making $100,000 a year? No. It helped people making millions of dollars a year. And so now in the debate, for the first time, that motivated ignorance is going to be displayed publicly in an empty hall. There's going to be no crowd saying, oh, yeah, that's great, yeah, applauding if he does indeed walk towards President Biden's podium, if he does the crazy things that he's apt to do. It'll be met by silence, and he'll be told to go back to his podium. His microphone will be shut off. That, I think, is going to be the most interesting aspect of this debate, Amanda. I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but the fact that he's isolated, no crowds, no applause, no feedback.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, we don't know what is going to happen, but I recall all the tales from White House aides who recount in great detail how Trump confronts people and approaches every conversation as essentially as an exercise in power dynamics. If you believe their tales about how he swears at people, uses physical presence in personal conversations, in the Oval Office, in Mar-a-Lago, which I do because I have no reason not to believe them because they're so entirely consistent. I do believe he'll be able to manipulate the stage in that way. I don't think personally, if I had to venture a guess, he will be intimidated by the lack of a cheering crowd because this is how he acts. You can't say that he's not authentic. He is authentically aggressive. He is authentically authoritarian. So I don't think he's going to have any problem trying to steamroll the debate moderators, correct, Joe Biden, and it will be an exercise for them to see how to constrain him.
Yeah, and Jonathan Lemire, I want to underline Mika's point. Mika, of course, always right. Underline Mika's point that nobody knows TV better than Donald Trump. Nobody's used it more effectively than Donald Trump. He has spent hundreds of hours in a quiet TV studio, and did quite well, knew how to play the camera, knew how to play the camera angles. And you know, I have been thinking all along that this would hurt Donald Trump But Mika, I think you may be right. And
just real quick, Jonathan Lemire, it's not just the hundreds of hours doing The Apprentice.
I mean, he doesn't need to even practice for this, Mika.
Sitting there in quiet. He doesn't practice. If the camera's on, he's dangerous. He goes for broke. If you look at his depositions, those were on camera, super awkward, with the attorney of E. Jean Carroll, who's extremely talented. And Trump was despicable, distasteful, gross. He was anything he wanted to be in that deposition because a camera was on, and it causes him to light up in the most base ways, in my opinion. I don't think he's afraid of anything. And in his mind, he hears a huge crowd, like cuckoo. He hears a huge crowd in his mind. He can make anything happen. Jonathan Lemire.
Yeah, I mean, there's never been an American politician who's been in front of a camera more or more at ease in front of a camera than Donald Trump. That is certainly clear. The Biden theory of the case, though, they watched him do that CNN town hall a year or so back where he ran roughshod over the moderator and was cheered on by a bunch of Trump-loving Republicans. And that's what made them think, as I've reported, say, you know what, when we meet with this guy in a debate a year from now, we don't want a crowd. The other part of that is because the Biden team really wants this to be, as much as it can be, a policy-focused debate. And they feel like, well, Donald Trump will fall short in trying to discuss policy, or he'll reveal policies that are out of step with the American people. So the Biden team certainly feels good about the fundamentals, about the setting of this race. But you're right. We have seen Trump in debates before at times deliver strong performances. In 2016, the Republican primaries, he was unquestionably the star and winner of most of those debates. But we've also seen him really struggle in this format. And I think, of course, in 2020, when he completely bombed that first debate, likely sick with COVID at the time, though he didn't announce it yet. And that really helped Biden in the race. But what is very clear, and there's a lot of wild cards here, and neither man has done a debate in quite some time. It's early, but it's a significant inflection point in the campaign.
Yeah, I think it really is. And again, Mika, you're so right. I mean, he's done this so often. You know, we talk about practicing. He doesn't have to practice. The guy doesn't need to practice at all between now and the debate. He can just walk out there because he spent his whole life doing this. So I think, personally, him practicing would be a waste of time.
All right, editor at the nonpartisan group Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, thank you very much for being on this morning. We appreciate it. We'll see you again soon.